This is not a fairy tale. They are all real soldiers, lying where they fell. For over 160 years, many of these Civil War images have been kept hidden because of too haunting for classrooms, too raw for history books. You are going to see 100 rare photographs, preserved in archives, forgotten by time, that will offer a view of war you may have never imagined. A Harvest of Death, Gettysburg, July 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg left fields so covered in bodies, locals called it a harvest of death. These men marched in with hope, only to be swallowed by history in silence. Confederate dead gathered for burial, Gettysburg, July 5, 1863. Just days later, burial teams worked under the burning sun. Each face they turned over was someone's brother, someone's son, now reduced to a number in the dirt. Unburied dead on the battlefield. But many never received even that small mercy. Here, the war lingers. Days after the guns fell silent, the land itself refused to forget. Confederate dead on the battlefield. Some died alone behind makeshift barricades, cut off, cornered, clinging to their final breath. This image froze the chaos of that last stand forever. Antietam, battlefield on the day after the battle. At Antietam, the air still carried the stench of gunpowder and blood the morning after. 22,000 men fell in a single day, the deadliest in American history. Antietam, view on the battlefield where Sumner's corps charged. Here, Sumner's men charged bravely, and were met with brutal crossfire. The land looks still now, but in 1862, it was a storm of death. Bodies of Confederate artillerymen near Dunker Church. Near Dunker Church, artillery crews were cut down mid-battle, their cannons falling silent beside them. This quiet grove became a grave without names. Home of a rebel sharpshooter. One sharpshooter's perch became his tomb. When photographers returned days later, his body hadn't moved, only the world around him had. Field with bodies and ruin, after battle. This was once a peaceful meadow. Gettysburg turned it into a wasteland of shattered fences, silent cannons, and boys who would never return home. Barlow's Knoll, Gettysburg, July 1, 1863. Barlow's Knoll witnessed the war's fury firsthand. The first day ended here with thousands dead or dying, yet the worst was still to come. A sharpshooter's last sleep, Gettysburg. Here he lies, rifle by his side, forever trapped in the moment he fell. This haunting stillness speaks louder than any battlefield report ever could. Burying the dead on the battlefield of Antietam, September 1862. By September's end, hurried burial crews tried to erase the horror. But as they shoveled earth over the fallen, they knew, these fields would never truly heal. Bull Run, Virginia, view of the battlefield. Bull Run was where the nation first realized this war would not be short, nor glorious. The battlefield became a grim prophecy of what was yet to unfold. Battle of South Mountain. At South Mountain, the fighting raged through forests and ridges. Soldiers marched in expecting a quick victory, but met the raw, merciless face of war instead. Cold Harbor, June 3, 1864. And finally, Cold Harbor, a slaughter so swift, thousands died within minutes. Some Union soldiers pinned their names to their uniforms, knowing they wouldn't return. Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, civilians in front of the hotel. Life didn't stop for civilians during the war, it simply bent under its weight. Here in Appomattox, families watched history unfold on their very doorsteps. Atlanta, Georgia, civilians crowded on the tops of boxcars at the railroad depot. Rail depots became lifelines and escape routes. In Atlanta, desperate crowds gathered atop trains, watching soldiers and war supplies move like clockwork toward chaos. A black family entering Union lines with a loaded cart. For many enslaved families, the war meant a dangerous gamble for freedom. With everything they owned piled on a single cart, they crossed into Union lines, not knowing what waited on the other side. Unidentified African American soldier in Union uniform with wife and 2 daughters. Some didn't just flee, they fought. This soldier stands proudly with his family, a living symbol of courage in a nation still divided over his humanity. Camp Hamilton, Fortress Monroe. Camp Hamilton became a sanctuary for the displaced. Refugees, soldiers, and freed families shared tents and uncertainty, clinging to hope beneath the canvas roofs. Atlanta, Georgia, the shell-damaged Ponder House. War didn't discriminate between battlefield and home. The Ponder House stood shattered, its walls pierced, its windows gone, like thousands of Southern homes caught in the crossfire. The Freedmen's Bureau drawn by A.R. vowed. Freedom brought new battles. The Freedmen's Bureau tried to guide millions into a life they'd been denied for centuries, but their path was filled with resistance, hunger, and broken promises. Tent life of the 31st Penn INF at Queen's Farm. Military camps became temporary cities. Soldiers and civilians alike carved out fragile routines, cooking, sewing, praying, just to survive another uncertain day. 2 wounded federal soldiers cared for by and Bell, a nurse. Amid the suffering, quiet heroes emerged. And Bell tended to broken soldiers with nothing but her hands and courage, giving kindness where the war gave only pain. Fugitive Negroes fording Rappahannock River, August 1862. Imagine the fear in this moment, families wading across a river, fleeing under threat of capture or death. Each ripple carried their fragile hope toward freedom. Richmond, Virginia, damage. Richmond, once the proud heart of the Confederacy, lay cracked and burned. Streets that once echoed with politics now whispered only ruin. Displaced people encamped outside destroyed homes. And in the ashes, the homeless gathered. Freed families, widows, and orphans built makeshift camps outside the wreckage, caught between the promise of freedom and the harshness of survival. Camp Scene, guarding Confederate prisoners. Behind the cannons, war had its own rhythm. Here, Union soldiers watch over captured Confederates, young men who, days earlier, were aiming rifles at each other. Burnside reading, Brady nearby, at the Army of the Potomac HQ, leaders weren't always on horseback in glory. General Burnside sits reading, while Matthew Brady, the photographer who defined the war's face, silently documents history in real time. Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant by a tent, Cold Harbor, 1864. Here stands Grant, the relentless strategist. In this quiet moment by his tent, he's plotting moves that would shatter the Confederacy's backbone, but at unimaginable cost. Ringgold Battery on drill/artillery and camp life. The war machine never slept. Artillery crews drilled endlessly behind the lines, polishing precision, preparing for the next thunderous barrage that awaited them. Civil War Camp Scene, Company Kitchen, 1863. For soldiers, moments of ordinary life were precious. The company kitchen was where they gathered, swapping letters, stories, and brief laughter in between nightmares. Soldiers at Rest After Drill, Petersburg, Virginia, 1864. Exhaustion was the soldiers' constant companion. Here they rest in the dirt, faces hardened, staring into the distance, wondering when their turn in the fight will come. 7 unidentified soldiers in Union uniforms with a drum and rifles. They were young, nameless, but full of purpose. A drum, a rifle, and a borrowed uniform were all that stood between boyhood and the brutality of war. Camp Letterman Field Hospital. When battles ended, suffering didn't. At Camp Letterman, tents stretched endlessly, each one holding pain, hope, and the fragile thread between life and death. Ambulance Drill of the 57th New York Infantry, 1864. Medical teams trained relentlessly, racing time itself. Ambulance drills like this were the difference between soldiers dying in fields, or seeing another sunrise. Ward and Carver General Hospital, Washington, D.C. Inside hospitals, war was quieter, but cruel. Rows of wounded men stared at ceilings, their futures uncertain, their bodies forever marked by what they had endured. Foreign observers with Major Gen. Stoneman, Falmouth, Virginia, 1863. The world was watching. Foreign officers traveled the lines, taking notes as America tore itself apart, knowing this war would shape nations beyond its borders. Commanders of the Army of the Potomac, September 1863. Here stand the architects of Union strategy, faces burdened by decisions that would decide the fate of millions. Every plan they made came with a human cost. Major General Philip Sheridan and Generals before the Tent, 1864. Sheridan and his men looked calm here, but their campaigns were anything but. Soon, their cavalry would sweep through the Shenandoah Valley, leaving devastation in its wake. Brandy Station, Virginia, Commissary Department, Army of the Potomac HQ. Behind every army was an invisible force, logistics. Commissary tents like these fed, clothed, and equipped thousands, keeping the Union Army alive day after day. Quartermaster's Department building transport steamers, Tennessee River, 1864. Far from the front, engineers built the arteries of war, steamers and bridges that carried armies forward. Without this quiet work, victories would have been impossible. Union nurse Clara Barton, March 1865. Her face is calm, but her heart carries the weight of thousands. Clara Barton walked through battlefields, bringing comfort where death reigned. History would remember her as the angel of the battlefield. Dr. Mary Edwards Walker. A surgeon, a rebel, a woman far ahead of her time. Dr. Mary Edwards Walker defied conventions, saving lives on the front lines and becoming the only woman ever to receive the Medal of Honor. Susie King Taylor, first African-American Army nurse. Born enslaved, Susie King Taylor became a nurse and teacher for Union soldiers. Her courage carved a path where none existed, her eyes tell the story of quiet defiance and strength. Sergeant Amos Humiston, 154th New York Volumes. When Sergeant Humiston's body was found at Gettysburg, he clutched a photo of his 3 children. That single image led to his family's discovery, and made him a symbol of the war's human cost. Robert Smalls, 3/4 length portrait. Once enslaved, Robert Smalls commandeered a Confederate ship and delivered it to Union forces, securing freedom for himself and his crew. His portrait radiates resolve, his act changed history. Unidentified Civil War soldier portrait. His name is lost, but his gaze cuts through time. Unidentified soldiers like him remind us that history isn't just made by generals, but by countless forgotten faces. Full-length portrait of an unidentified Civil War soldier. He stands stiffly for the camera, unsure of what lies ahead. For many, these portraits were taken just days before marching into the unknown, sometimes never to return. 3/4 tintype portrait, young soldier in kepi. Barely more than a boy, wearing his kepi proudly. You can almost sense the mix of fear and excitement in his eyes, as if he's trying to convince himself he's ready for war. Unidentified Confederate soldier. On the other side, another young man posed for what might be his only lasting image. Uniformed for a cause that would divide the nation, he likely never imagined his photo would outlive his name. Corporal Naylor, 13th Pennsylvania Cavalry, 1861 to 1865. Corporal Naylor served with quiet determination. His portrait survives as a rare, clear glimpse into the faces of those who held the Union together, one soldier at a time. Samuel Black, Civil War soldier. His stance is proud, his expression unflinching. Samuel Black represents thousands of ordinary men who became extraordinary under the weight of war. Unidentified young soldier in Confederate infantry uniform. His youth is undeniable. So many like him marched into war with dreams of glory, only to meet the brutal reality of gunfire and muddy fields. Unidentified soldier in Confederate shell jacket. This soldier's half-buttoned jacket, weathered face, and steady gaze tell a story without words. He stands frozen between boyhood and battle. Unidentified soldier in Confederate uniform. His name may be forgotten, but his portrait endures. Each image like this is a whisper from the past, a reminder that every life, named or not, shaped the course of history. Field telegraph station. In an age before radio, these wires were lifelines. Field telegraph stations carried news of victories, defeats, and desperate pleas, faster than any writer ever could. Union cipher operators in Vicksburg, June 1865. Here, Union cipher operators worked in silence, cracking and coding messages that could change the course of battles. Their invisible war was fought with brains, not bayonets. U.S. Military Telegraph Construction Corps erecting wire. Across forests and fields, the Telegraph Corps strung wire mile by mile, racing ahead of armies. They built the nervous system of a war that stretched over a fractured nation. Field Telegraph Battery Wagon. This wagon may look ordinary, but it was a mobile command center. With it, generals could reach distant regiments in minutes, reshaping how wars were fought forever. USS Baron de Kalb, an Eads-class ironclad. The ironclads were the monsters of their day, floating fortresses of steam and steel. The USS Baron de Kalb prowled the rivers, proving that the future of war was made of iron, not wood. The first transcontinental railroad. Railroads became the arteries of war. The first transcontinental line tied a vast nation together, moving troops, weapons, and hope faster than anyone had imagined. The first telegram, Professor Morse sending the dispatch. This moment changed history. The first telegram, sent by Morse himself, opened a new era of instant communication, an invention that would help shape the outcome of war and peace alike. U.S. military railroad engineers, building a wooden trestle bridge. Engineers worked day and night, replacing bridges destroyed by retreating forces. Their hands rebuilt what war tried to tear apart, so the Union could keep pushing forward. Burning and evacuation of Richmond, April 3, 1865. Richmond burned as Confederate forces retreated, their own fires consuming the city they once swore to protect. In a single night, a proud capital became an inferno of defeat. Petersburg, Virginia, ruins of railroad bridge. The bridges that once connected armies and families were reduced to twisted skeletons. Petersburg's ruined bridge stands as a silent witness to a war that severed more than just tracks. Fredericksburg, Virginia, Barnard House destroyed. Here, the Barnard House lies shattered beneath the weight of artillery. What was once a family home became a casualty of a battle that tore through towns as if they were paper. Petersburg, Virginia, ruins of houses. Street by street, Petersburg crumbled. Families fled, soldiers dug in, and by the end, only hollow shells of buildings remained, like broken teeth in a ruined smile. Petersburg, Virginia, earthworks in front of Petersburg. The earth itself was torn apart to build defenses. Miles of trenches scarred the landscape, turning peaceful fields into grim fortresses of mud, blood, and desperation. Charleston, South Carolina, ruins, 1865. Charleston, once the spark that ignited the war, lay in ruins by its end. Fires, shells, and years of conflict stripped the city of its former glory, leaving only smoke and silence. Charleston, South Carolina, ruins. Block after block collapsed into rubble. These ruins weren't just buildings, they were symbols of a collapsing way of life, erased by the very war it had helped to start. St. John and St. Finbar Cathedral ruins, Charleston, 1865. Even churches weren't spared. The magnificent St. John and St. Finbar Cathedral stood as a monument to faith, until flames reduced it to charred stone and ash. Columbia, South Carolina, ruins. In Columbia, destruction spread like a fever. Entire neighborhoods vanished overnight, their streets glowing red under the march of Sherman's troops and the chaos they left behind. Atlanta Depot destruction, 1864. Atlanta's railway depot was once a hub of life and movement. After Sherman's army came through, only scorched beams and shattered tracks remained, choking the heart of the South's supply lines. Atlanta, Georgia, view on Whitehall Street. This once bustling street was reduced to a corridor of wreckage. Brick walls stood cracked like old scars, as if the city itself remembered every blow. Wexford Lodge, Vicksburg, after the siege, 1863. Wexford Lodge looks eerily quiet after the siege. Behind its battered walls, families had huddled through weeks of bombardment, praying for survival as the city above them fell apart. Ruins of the Stone Bridge, March 1862. The stone bridge once carried soldiers toward Bull Run. By 1862, it lay in ruins, its broken arches reflecting a nation equally fractured and fragile. Petersburg, alternate ruin stereograph. Another glimpse of Petersburg's devastation. The repetition of ruin drives home a painful truth: the war didn't just claim lives, it erased entire communities. Ruins in front of the Capitol, Richmond, 1865. Even the seat of power was not spared. The ruins before the Capitol stood as a grim monument to a Confederacy in collapse, its grand dreams reduced to rubble. Andersonville Prison, Georgia, south view of the stockade, August 17, 1864. Andersonville was hell on earth. Nearly 45,000 Union prisoners were crammed inside these wooden walls. Disease, starvation, and exposure turned this camp into a slow death sentence. Prisoners burying the dead at Andersonville, August 17, 1864. Here, fellow captives dig shallow trenches for their fallen. Hundreds died each week. The prisoners became both survivors and grave diggers, forced to bury the friends they lived beside. Emaciated prisoner released from Belle Isle. His body tells the story no journal ever could. Released from Confederate captivity, this man's skeletal frame is living proof of the horrors endured inside prison camps. Execution of Captain Henry Wirz, Reporters and Onlookers, November 10, 1865. After the war, Captain Henry Wirz, Commandant of Andersonville, faced execution for war crimes. Crowds gathered not out of justice alone, but to witness history exact its vengeance. Libby Prison, Richmond, August 23, 1863. Libby Prison looked ordinary from the outside, but inside, Union officers endured starvation, disease, and overcrowding. Escape attempts became legends, whispered through the dark halls at night. Surgical photograph, Amputations and Skulls, Army Medical Museum. This is one of the war's most unsettling images. Piles of amputated limbs and skulls lay preserved for study. Medicine advanced quickly, but at a terrible human cost few were prepared to face. Graves of the 6 men hung at Andersonville, July 11, 1864. Here lie 6 prisoners who turned on their own, murderers within the camp, hanged by fellow captives. Even in places of suffering, human cruelty found new layers. Union soldiers upon release from Confederate prisons. These men survived captivity, but their faces are hollow, their bodies broken. They returned home alive, but forever changed, carrying scars no photograph could fully capture. Relics of Andersonville Prison. The war left behind more than graves. Shackles, spoons, worn shoes, mute relics of unimaginable suffering. Each object carries the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Portrait of Harriet Tubman, famed abolitionist and Union spy. She risked everything to lead others to freedom. Harriet Tubman not only guided the enslaved through the Underground Railroad, she spied for the Union, outwitting armies to break chains that had held for centuries. Allan Pinkerton with General McClernand. Pinkerton, a master of intelligence, stood beside Union generals, unraveling Confederate secrets. His network of spies helped tilt the war's hidden battles toward freedom and victory. Pauline Cushman, American Civil War spy. Actress turned Union spy, Pauline Cushman, used her wit and charm to slip behind enemy lines. Her daring missions nearly cost her life, but her information saved countless others. Milton W. Kline, Civil War scout. Milton Kline ventured where armies could not. Scouts like him moved silently through forests and enemy lines, their bravery ensuring that freedom's fight never walked blind. Elizabeth Van Lew, Union spy in Richmond. Deep in the Confederate capital, Elizabeth Van Lew built an underground network of Union loyalists. She risked execution daily, proving that courage sometimes wears an ordinary face. Company E, 4th U.S. Colored Infantry, at Fort Lincoln. They marched under a flag that had once ignored their humanity. The men of the 4th U.S. Colored Infantry fought not only for a nation but for the right to be recognized as equals. Eleanor C. Ransom, Civil War nurse, with UA Union soldier. Eleanor Ransom cared for the wounded with quiet strength. Her compassion stitched together what war tried to tear apart, reminding soldiers that dignity still mattered even in suffering. Emaciated prisoner of war, Private Isaiah G. Boker, Belle Isle. This is the face of survival against impossible odds. Starved nearly to death, Isaiah Boker lived to bear witness, so that history could not pretend it didn't happen. Civil War facial wound. The war left wounds that went far beyond the battlefield. Surgeons worked miracles, but faces like this became lifelong reminders of the price paid for a nation's rebirth. Prisoner of war from Belle Isle at the U.S. General Hospital. Inside Union hospitals, released prisoners began the long fight back to life. Their thin frames and hollow eyes carried stories too painful for words, but impossible to ignore. A federal officer wounded at Pine Mountain, Georgia, August 1864. He stares at the camera, wounded but unbroken. His gaze carries the resilience of a generation that endured unimaginable suffering to shape a new future. Civil War medical photography by Dr. R.B. Bontecu. These haunting medical portraits were taken to teach future surgeons, but they ended up preserving something far greater, the human cost of freedom, etched forever in flesh and film. They say history is written by the victors, but these faces, these ruins, these forgotten moments. They remind us that history is also carried by the silent. By the soldiers who never came home. By the families who rebuilt from ashes. By the heroes who fought not for glory, but for freedom. Each photograph you've seen tonight isn't just an image. It's a voice from the past, whispering, "Do not forget us." If this journey moved you, don't let their stories fade again. Share this video, leave your thoughts below, and subscribe to help us keep unearthing the forgotten pages of history. Because the past only truly dies when we stop remembering it.